Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you are in the world signing in today to be with us. Welcome to today's webinar on agricultural solutions to mega global challenges. And there's certainly a lot of them we're dealing with right now. My name is Ernie Shea, and I'm with Solutions from the Land. I'll be serving as the moderator for this 60-minute presentation today. And we had, well, I don't know how many we ended up with, close to 100 registrants, so I'm sure we'll have people joining as we go through the hour here today. Our focus is on innovation and policy pathways that are going to be put into motion to better enable farmers, ranchers, and foresters to adopt climate-smart ag systems and deliver and be rewarded, in fact, for delivering high-value solutions to these challenges we're facing: food and nutrition security, climate, health. A variety of challenges have co-joined here that are creating a fresh conversation about how agriculture can be contributing solutions. In terms of our format today, we have two speakers who are going to kick us off talking about developments at the global level. We're going to then switch to the national scene and have a conversation about U.S. climate enabling policy, and then we're going to flip back and wrap up with Fred Yoder talking a little bit about the Cornevia Work Program and his perspectives as a farmer leader active in many of these conversations. So if you've just joined, again, I'd request that you mute your microphone. We have a chat function that will enable you to pose questions that we'll be monitoring as we go through this call. And what I'd like to do is take each speaker individually and have a question and answer session following that. So we will try to watch our time closely and get through everything by the top of the hour. With that, I'd like to formally introduce our first speaker, which is the Honorable Kip Tom. Ambassador Tom is the ambassador to the UN agencies in Rome. Kip is known to many of us as a very progressive, forward thinking and operating farmer. He's a 7th generation farmer from Indiana whose operation has grown sizably over the years to include farming operations both in the United States as well as in Argentina. He's been active on any number of economic development and philanthropic organizations, including the National 4-H Foundation and the National Future Farmers of America. And I can't think of a better person to be representing U.S. agriculture interests in Rome at this very, very critical time. So with no further ado, Ambassador Tom, welcome, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Ernie, and thank you for everybody that's on this call today, the North American Climate Smart Agricultural Alliance here. We're going to try this real quick here and see if my screen is sharing, and we'll turn it on and see if I can get my presentation in front of you now.
Yeah, it's going.
Okay, one moment here. Well, as Ernie said, I'm the U.S. ambassador to the United States, for the United States, to the UN mission in Rome, Italy. In that mission, I serve 6 different UN agencies: the World Food Program, which many of you have heard of, the Food and Agriculture Organization that I'm sure many of you heard of. It's the one that's supposed to create resilience and capacity in farming systems. IFAD, International Fund for Agriculture Development, mainly working in developing nations, helping smallholder farmers and actually some commercial units secure funding to run their farming operations. UNIDRAW, which most of you have probably never heard of, is an organization that perfects public law. So for instance, in the banking sector, if a bank in the United States wanted to give a lien or produce a lien on farm equipment, agriculture equipment, as I said, construction, excavation equipment, or even aircraft, they've been able to perfect those liens around the world, no matter where that asset is. And it's encouraged development around the world. So it's been particularly helpful in agriculture. IDLO is International Development Law Organizations. That's where we go into developing countries and we focus on, for instance, in Afghanistan, where we have actually helped women now have the opportunity to own farmland. prior to a few years ago, they didn't have that opportunity. So IDLO works on those kind of practices. And in ECROM, a very small organization, is cultural heritage preservation. So again, the two that I'm going to highlight today will be the World Food Program and the FAO. So these are the different U.S. government organizations we interlock with. We work with USDA and a lot of technical and some trade. USAID, of course, that is our main source of funding to help us on our World Food Program, and actually a lot of our work at FAO. And then we look at the USTR, United States Trade Representative Office. We work a lot with Ambassador Dow there and a number of his staff, because anything we do in food policy, it's typically related to trade. So very important unit work with. And then the Department of Treasury, because of our relationship with EFAD and our support of that organization. You know, this is a chart we've all seen. There's different numbers that come from it, but we know we need to nearly double the world's supply of food, given today's trends, improving incomes and people's desire to put protein in their diet. So this is something you've all seen many times, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So where is hunger today? Let's talk about this. This is where I look at these two organizations that I'm representing the United States for. It's the World Food Program. The organization is supposed to go in and meet that immediate need. Where people are used to be in the past, it was always a natural disaster, earthquake, tsunami, hurricanes, floods, things like that. Today, it's nearly 70% of the work we do is in the midst of civil conflict, and that is the driver behind a lot of the places where we're producing and getting food into these people that are on the edge of starvation. In fact, of the 821 million that last year's report that we submitted to the UN said was hungry around the world, 135 million of those people are IPC-CH3+, which is they're on the edge of starvation. Now, the news I've got to share with you, and this is pre-COVID, we came up with this number, we actually model that number nearly doubling in the next 12 months. So imagine 265 to 270 million people on the edge of a famine. So we've got our work cut out for us, and that's a lot of the work we've been doing at the World Food Program, is to shore up our resources to make sure that we have the ability to have food pre-positioned to meet this challenge. For instance, we've added 5 new hubs, airport hubs around the world where we're actually flying freight in. In fact, we increased our air flights of freight of food into different countries by over 350 flights a month. At the same time, we're adding about 350 flights of human resources and actors to go in and do the humanitarian work in these different countries. That's on top of the 17 to 20 ocean vessels we run at any one time, 5,500 ships, or 5,500 trucks that are delivering food every day. So it's a challenging world that we live in. But this organization is about an $8.5 billion organization. The U.S. contributes about 3.5 billion in the last 12 months to the World Food Program. We give actually more per capita than any other nation in the world. So again, it provides the immediate relief. One of the challenges I've seen, and I think Robynne can speak to this, and so can Ernie, and the others have watched this for so many years, this organization continues to grow. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago, our budget was half of what it is today, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So this is where the Food and Agriculture Organization was supposed to be in, and really creating that resilience and capacity building across these developing countries, helping people feed themselves. We've got places where we've been feeding different populations for 4 generations. 4 generations, there's no map, there's no way out of that at the current stage. So we've got to make a difference at the FAO. This map, I'm going to go really quickly through these because 15 minutes go fast, but you can see where the hungry nations are around the world, and you can only imagine the challenges we face there. But one thing for certain, when people don't have the ability to feed themselves, when they don't have the ability to feed themselves, they'll give up hope. And when they give up hope, they migrate. When they migrate, they get caught up in human trafficking, which is nearly 20 million people a year. We know that they get involved in extremism, getting involved, and that affects our own national security, but as well as Canada and other countries that are like-minded around the world. So it's a real challenge. So what we want to do is make sure that we're on the front lines of instilling peace and security around the world, giving people the capacity to feed themselves. That came directly from Secretary Pompeo, and we live and do it every day here at US-UN Rome. So when we look at what causes famine today, this was one that came out of FAO. It said high food prices, natural disasters, humanitarian access, conflict, extreme climate, and I added one other. It's the lack of access to innovation. As you go across Africa, they have been denied nearly 20 years having access to the innovations, whether it's simple innovations. It could be just fertilizer. We've got some countries that have completely outlawed fertilizer, no BT crops, not even any hybrid corn. They're just doing all inbred practices. For instance, I'll give you a good example. Nearly 30 to 40% of a lot of the maize crop across the continent of Africa is lost every year to fall armyworm. A solution to that would be either crop chemistry and a BT variety, but it's been denied with the exception of a few countries. So it's those kind of things that really have an impact, but just think about their main staple crop, and 40% of it is consumed by insects and aren't able to feed themselves. There's other things that we deal with every day. The desert locust outbreak in Africa. This is one where the FAO, I'll be very straightforward on this. This is something that started over a year ago over in India and Pakistan. The cyclone season moved them across the Arabic Sea and on across into Yemen and then on across into the Horn of Africa. This has got the potential to be very devastating. I probably spend 2-3 hours a day on calls across the Horn of Africa with USAID, with our ambassadors in those countries, and with governmental leaders, and a few times the presidents of the country. And the point here is, if we aren't successful on this nearly $310 million campaign today to control this pest, it's going to be a $2.5 billion cost just in humanitarian aid. So we're working very hard to make sure we're successful in this campaign. As you can see, they're consuming nearly 1.75 million metric tons of green vegetation a day. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I plan on being down there sometime in early July just to see how the campaign is going. But these are the kind of situations we deal with besides drought and other ones. When we talk about drought, the effects of a climate changing. I think we can all argue whether we think climate change is real or what caused it, but something's going on in Africa. Temperatures continue to increase, dryness continues to get worse, and the ability to feed themselves continues to erode. But there are places where there's floods more frequently than in the past. So something's changing, and they just don't have the tools to deal with it. And like I said, oftentimes they give up hope and they migrate. When we look at the access to innovations, a simple one to think about is you think about the United States. We, in 1900, 50% of our population was involved in, I'll call it subsistence farming. I mean, we were producing enough revenue in 1900 mainly to feed ourselves and maybe conduct a little commerce in our little communities. And, slowly by the 1910, 1920s, we started to mechanize. But even the United States, it took into the 50s till we had more tractors on farms than horses. But when I look at these 6 pictures here, the one in the upper left-hand corner is in Zimbabwe in their museum. And that was what was depicted of a farmer in 800 BC. You see how he's bent over, you see the tool he's holding. Well, let's fast forward to 2020. That's a lot of times lapse, and they're still farming the same way. The only thing that's different, it's a woman on the end of that hoe. And I can tell you their FAO has been a long time, and this has been driven by EU policy practically, or for most of the time at FAO, is do we really need to mechanize? Do we need to have them go the route that modern agriculture's went? Because this is jobs. This is a way to employ people and get them all engaged in farming. So you can see some of the challenges we face just in mechanization. When we look at, like I said earlier, people migrate, and I've been at all 4 of these places, and those are pictures I've taken actually, but you can see the expression on their faces. The one in the upper right-hand corner was at the edge of Turkey, people migrating in from Africa. The one in the lower right-hand corner was in South Sudan, in an IDP village that had about, I think it was around 70-some thousand people in it, that we fly all their food resources in to feed them. It could be U.S. sorghum, it could be canola oil, it could be soybean oil. It could be wheat flour from some other place in the Middle East. So there's that going on. And then you can see in the lower left-hand corner, you can see people migrating. And I've never seen like this in my life, but it's a sad sight to see. This is just that one internally displaced people village that I was in South Sudan. And you see the people are happy. You can see that, because we're there, they feel that, they're getting food resources. We came in the day that we had 5 aircraft come in and drop nearly 80-some ton of food. So you can see it's a big day for them, and we're provisioning it over in that warehouse behind us. But again, some of these people, this generation here was displaced because of civil conflict, and they were put in the middle of a swamp. I got some later pictures that shows this, that water in this area was 1 or 2 deep here just recently in South Sudan. So as I said, these people, once they give up hope and they migrate, they get caught up in extremism. We have very good evidence of this. We have all kinds of intel that shows that they get involved with ISIS, Boko Haram, Taliban. ISIS of all of them, nearly a $2 billion a year organization that will pay and recruit people to come and be a part of it. I've seen video scenes myself in Yemen where children were going through the city of Sana'a to go get their food provisions with their parents, and 2 10 and 12-year-old boys stripped from their parents to join extremism. This is something that's real, and it's something that puts chills up my spine every time I hear about it. And you can see it's just not men. They're recruiting women, and you can see they're recruiting children as well. But the area I worry about this the most is probably across the Sahel of Africa, where we're facing the biggest challenges in climate, and we're seeing these migrations take place today. So as many of you know, a lot of people question our food systems ever since the coronavirus, Wuhan virus, Chinese virus, whatever you want to call it, has occurred. The reality is, I'll say those in the developed world, our food system's been pretty resilient. Yeah, we've had our hiccups, there's no doubt. I mean, if I'm a vegetable producer, I didn't have someone to take my crop, or I was a pork producer, and I didn't have a packing plant to take my animals, and I had young pigs coming into my farm. There was different things like that. It really put a lot of people into question when they look at our food system. But the reasoning is we will bounce back very quick. And that was more of a human issue than anything else that drove that to the point where we had actually some hesitation or some pause in our food system. But the reality is, as I said, we recover very quickly. But right now, there's a lot of people throwing stones at our food system. In fact, you look at the $17 trillion food supply chain in the world today, and you understand that 4/5 or 4 out of every $5 is food that has crossed a border somewhere. We have to be able to have, the ability to trade across borders, and to have the systems we have today, where maybe it's Cargill moving some cargo afraid of a product somewhere different. They can change that at a moment's notice now. We can have someone change their feed rations to make things meet. So we do have a pretty resilient food system, but one that needs to evolve at the same time. This is just an overlay map of where food security and undernourishment takes place, and then where we had COVID cases. And you can see, obviously, you get through Asia, parts of South America, but a lot of this is in the developing world, with the exception of Europe. And we have a lot of cases there, obviously. We look here, this is what concerns me more than anything else. That real GDP growth, what we're expecting going forward into the next year. Now, as I said, the World Food Program pulls in about $8.5 billion in the last 12 months. The United States is the largest contributor. I think you can all attest that you're worried about our own ability to even take care of our own nation fiscally. And I can tell you there's a lot of other nations around the world that are in the same condition. So when we think of that budget, we say, what do we do? How do we manage our resources to make sure we can prioritize where we need to really conduct and move food in, and we can be efficient? Because we worry about this. And here's where it comes down to. Some of our modeling suggests, and this is public information, some modeling we have suggests that we could see our funding go down to the point where we would be 15 to 20% lower than where we should be. But that's enough to trigger where we could see losses of nearly 300,000 people a day. 300,000 people a day for upwards of 3 months. That's a startling number. And it's one that can make a lot of people emotional. And that's why we're doing everything we can right now. The United States has stepped back up a week and a half ago. We think we're going to get this through the House. We're going to pull in another $1.5 billion for food aid, another $400 million for logistics to help meet this challenge in front of us. But other countries need to jump in too, and they have for the most part. Germany continues to be a big gifter. Canada's been good, and Australia, New Zealand for what they can do, in India, but there's others, but some just aren't keeping pace, and it seems like it drops in the U.S.'s hands most of the time. Something else for you to keep on your mind, this is a big deal. If don't read this at night before you go to bed because you won't sleep. You got to read this in the morning when you get up so you got time to digest it. But the European Commission came out with their Farm to Fork strategy for a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system. Once you read the document, I think you might agree with this, but I think it's a food system that's a strategy that is based upon the indulgence of the rich, as indefensible scientifically and indefensible morally. It's one that they want to go to the Agri Ecology practice without using any innovations. They're moving away from pesticide products. They're moving away from fertilizer. They're moving away from, there's a little mention of possibly going into some GMO corn. But for the most part, they're talking about a food system that won't be resilient, one that won't be able to help do their part in feeding a hungry world. And it's not just about the Europeans. If you read their documents, you'll soon see that they want to make this the standard for the world, the gold standard for food production systems. But when I read through this document, and I think you'll find the same thing when you get into it, what they're talking about doing over the next 20 years, a lot of this we've been doing for the last 20 years, whether it's digital technologies, whether it's the way we manage our pesticides, our fertilizer, things like that. But we haven't talked about it enough. And I think this is one thing we need to get in front of this. I know USDA is fully engaged, USTR, and we are, to make sure that we have a voice in this, to make sure it doesn't come and be the world standard. They say in there a number of times, they want this to be the system that's deployed across Africa. Now, we all know that Europe spends nearly $65 to $70 billion a year on their CAP program, their agricultural program. This one even goes up much higher as they fully implement it in their strategies. Now, I'll say there's some good things I like about it, the way they're trying to address carbon emissions, things like that. And I think this is where the U.S. industry can we're doing it. I think we're improving our carbon footprint, but the reality is we're not letting people know about it. We're not getting anything for it. So it's those kind of things I think we need to start talking about much more, but read this and be aware of it. Again, do it in the morning. Another topic I want to bring up is a food system summit that will take place in UN at Unruh in New York in 2021. I am serving on an advisory committee there under Special Envoy Alice Kalabata. And this is one that I can tell you we're going to face a lot of challenges, because in that document that I just talked about from the EU, they're talking about making sure that is the gold standard placed upon this food system, this summit in New York. So this has got trade implications, but most importantly to me, it's got implications on our ability to feed those people around the world that are hungry today. And this is why it's so important to me to be engaged with this, but it's going to be a big deal. It's not supposed to have outcomes, but they're going to have guidance in there that I can assure that they're going to hold people accountable for, and they'll come back. So pay attention to that and be willing to be involved. So as I close up here, when I think of food security, these are the things that go through my head of what do we do? What are the different items we need to consider? And as you all know, I think there's the world of food production and food systems. It's a complex world. You know, I think there's a lot of times the ambassadors I work with here in Rome, of the 194, they're members of FAO. I think there might be a few of us that are farmers in there, but let's say there's 190 of them are mainly people who's worked in UN systems or have been ambassadors around the world, other places, and really don't know much about agriculture. But they get guidance from capital that thinks they have to adapt these systems, as they're talking about that the EU continues to promote. So these are some of the things I think about here that we can really have an impact in changing what we do in food systems. I can tell you what we're doing here at the mission's got the highest level of attention in the United States. You know, whether it's the vice president, the president has been very instrumental in increasing our budgets, making sure we have the money to invest. I've had meetings with at the UN. You can see Speaker Gingrich there, his wife, Callista Gingrich. I've done a lot of work with the Holy Seas to work with them and working on food security around the world. You can see a visit there in South Sudan, where I'm trying to shake the hand of a young boy that was 9 years old, childhood stunting. And then, you know, Secretary of Agriculture, and then you got Secretary Pompeo in the upper right-hand corner. So this is getting a lot of attention, and they want to make a difference. So I'm going to try to play this video for us in my closing here, and then I'll close it up. Well, that's obviously not going to work, so that's not going to work. So anyway, it's a video that we produce at the World Food Program to highlight the impact of children around the world in food security, and how so many of them don't have opportunities in their lives to either get an education, create economic opportunities in their communities. Just so many of the things we take for granted in a developed world. So I'm passionate about what I do. And as a farmer, when I see this going on around the world, it really gets my attention. And I'm sure it does all of you in this room listening today, because food security around the world and its impact on trade is going to be very important for many more years as we continue to grow that global population. So I thank you for that.
Ambassador Tom, thank you very much for your leadership, for that insightful presentation. You've given us a lot to think about. It was a great way to set the stage for what will follow. I saw one question that I'm going to pose to you right now, and then I think we'll move along and maybe we can cover additional questions at the end. But you referenced the World Food Summit and the advisory committee that you were serving on. Could you describe for us who else is helping to advise the development of the summit and the recommendations that will come out? Who else is serving with you?
So the World Food Systems Summit at the UN, Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General, is actually facilitating a lot of leadership there. But Agnes Kalabata, who used to be with Agri, who is, I call her a friend, she's been very helpful in setting this up. But she is the special envoy based in Nairobi and Rome, and she's going to be spending a lot of time in New York as well. But she is the one that is leading this. I've had meetings with her in California and other places and try to stay in very close contact with her. So when you look at, it's her, and then after that you have the advisory committee. On that advisory committee, we've got France is on there, Italy's on there, Hungary, Russia, China, UAE. I'm trying to think who else is on there. Brazil and Argentina. I haven't seen the nations from Africa, and I will represent the North, and there will be another person representing the South. So it's a fairly small group, and then there'll be a champions group, which is a mix of people from around the world, and then a scientific technical body committee that will be a part of it as well. And that is going to be led by a German scientist that I've had a number of conversations with. So that's how it's going to shape up. Again, it could take place virtually at this point in time. That's what we're hearing, but nonetheless, there'll be a lot of fanfare leading up to it. And I can tell you, all hands on deck on this one. And I'm sure Robynne will share some of that too, but it's something we have to be involved with, or it's going to impact trade, and it's going to impact those who we try to feed around the world every day.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ambassador Tom. And if you could stay on, and we'll pick up some additional questions at the end. So now we're going to segue and move on to our second global speaker, who is Robynne Anderson. Robynne, I've gotten to know over the last couple of weeks as our organization, Solutions from the Land, has joined the International Agri-Food Network, and we're active now in the private sector mechanism within FAO. Robynne serves as the Secretariat for both of those organizations. She is a global agriculture and food policy expert and a real source of inspiration and help to me. So Robynne, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ernie, and it's a real pleasure to join you. And also to follow Ambassador Tom. Having Ambassador Tom and Tommy Williams from USDA in place has really increased the presence of farmers, as he noted, in a diplomatic circle where sometimes practical experience of the soil is not as evident. And we really appreciate having that change in tenor that comes from people who have lived and worked on the land. And next slide. One of the things that we certainly are hearing a lot is, why get involved at the United Nations? As Ambassador Tom noted, there are really compelling social issues at play. There are issues related to how we farm and judgments on how that works that need to be made. We are seeing regular discussions about the impacts of COVID on the food supply. And as Ambassador Tom said, we've done relatively well in the quote developed world, but there isn't an agricultural food company that I work with right now that hasn't had to move to 24-hour shifts to produce the same amount of product that they used to, and increase their workforces generally by about 25%, incurring all those extra costs. Huge logistical challenges in even getting containers, changed packaging sizes in light of new food changes. And I think there needs to be more celebration of what we've achieved. And at the same time, there's a narrative about, well, the solution is we can all plant a garden in the cities and we should just produce food locally and that will give us security. But in the face of climate change, in the face of changing realities, we need food systems that are robust locally and globally to make sure that where there is wet weather getting Fred's crops in late, that there are some options to make sure that we have food supply and harvests that are coming in different places in different stages. But whenever we're engaged in these issues, if Ambassador Tom's remarks weren't poignant enough to make you think about why the UN is important, from a private sector perspective, I think another reason why people are often compelled is that UN decisions, whether legally binding or not, presage national rules and regulations around the world. It's not that you have to follow everything that the UN did, it's that really it is a bellwether of where conversations are pointed. And as this is a Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, a perfect example is the discussion about climate change, which began at the UN really back in the 90s in a forceful way. And from that original Rio summit, it's rather hard to imagine the world not talking about climate change these days. Next slide. And to do that, we have a few venues where we can get engaged. The International Agri-Food Network, agrifood.net is the website. This is a banner page of where we took registrations for the UN Committee on Food Security last year. We're going to be talking about that more. We also have the exciting new leadership of Dr. Chu, who is the new incoming and now in place Director General of FAO, who has a very practical experience of agriculture and has really brought a breath of fresh air, a new interest in partnerships and engagements in Rome. And we really want to make use of having the great opportunity to have the likes of Ambassadors Tom and Williams, having a great team in Canada, and the expertise that Dr. Chu and his new team bring to the discussions. Next slide. So if we were to discuss specifically the UN Committee on Food Security, because Ernie gave me the chance to try and explain to you a little bit about where can you intersect in some of these conversations. Ambassador Tom talked about some of the big overarching issues and the reasons why they're important, but in particular, the UN Committee on Food Security is one of the only places in the context of the discussion about food where we can have private sector actors participate. So this committee actually reports to the UN General Assembly through a group called ECOSOC at the United Nations, and it's made up of the member states of the different countries. And it's resourced by a secretariat of the three Rome-based agencies, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the World Food Programme, which Ambassador Tom introduced. And in addition to that, it allows non-state actors to have a seat at the table for the negotiations. We don't get a vote, but we do get a voice. Next slide. So how does CFS do its work? Basically, and I'll get you to hit the button 2 times, Carla, here so they can see the whole slide. There is a plenary which is made up of all these member states, and they nominate a chair of an open-ended working group on a particular topic. Right now they're working on agro-ecology and other innovations, and also on voluntary guidelines related to food systems and nutrition. So those work streams have an open-ended working group that's like a committee, and you get to participate in that committee process, which then provides the recommendations to the plenary for final discussion and approval. And so we go through iterations of looking at these documents, providing comments, and then hoping to get an outcome that reflects the diversity of agriculture around the world and the things that need to be done to protect the people who live in rural areas and to feed everyone successfully and healthily. Next slide. So how does the private sector mechanism with a PSM, because everything has to be an acronym in the UN, so how does PSM fit into CFS? We get to be part of the advisory group, which includes UN bodies, including the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, and the US, the Standing Committee on Nutrition, and then there are 4 seats for civil society. There's 1 seat for private sector, 1 seat for philanthropy, 1 seat for research bodies, and 1 seat for the international finance groups currently held by World Bank, though they're not very active. Next slide. And PSM aims to try and bring a whole broad range of voices across the agri-food value chain into the UN Committee on Food Security. So we have farmers groups, we have food producers, we have input suppliers, ag retailers, traders, we have SMEs, we have large-scale global companies, we have people in the investment community working in agriculture, groups like Rabobank and TIAA. And then on top of that, we add foresters and fishers. So if you are in agriculture and food and you want to participate, we welcome you. Next slide. And these are some of the funders who are involved in supporting the private sector mechanism. Civil society gets about 1 million euros a year to support its activities, and PSM gets no support. We raise all those funds voluntarily through the support of groups like these. And next slide. And all of this is coordinated by the International Agri-Food Network, which is a group that has existed since the original World Food Summit 25 years ago. And it has 16 international associations and farm groups that all come together and collectively represent tens of thousands of companies all around the world in 131 nations. The current chair of IFN is Rick White, and IFN is elected as the focal point for the private sector mechanism. That election occurs every 2 years. Next slide. And I'm going to just highlight many of these organizations you will know. Most particularly, I'd like to flag that Ernie and the team with Solutions for the Land is a new member. We're thrilled to have you, and I think AG is on the call, members of your board. The U.S. Soybean Association, USEC, is on the group as well. But for the most part, we have not had as much engagement from U.S. farm organizations. So I'd like to do a shout out to Marilyn Hershey from DMI, who came to an event in Rome last year, which Ambassador Tom chaired, on the International Year of Family Farming, and talked about a variety of farming practices and how important it is to get those farmer voices heard. So we'd love to see more of the farm groups from the US join the organization, particularly with the Food Summit coming up and more activity happening in this space. Next slide. So when you think about it, in 2010, when they reformed the CFS, in 2011, we had just one person from private sector in attendance. And last year we had 200 people, and they're working across 2 different macro committees. And I'll show you just some of the composition very quickly, next slide, of that group. We had about 28% were farmers, that's that big yellow chunk in that pie, and the rest are all the different parts of the agri-food value chain. So we're a really diverse group, pretty equal in terms of men and women. And next slide. And pretty diverse around the globe. People from Africa, Asia, the Pacific, Latin America, and from North America. So, please, if you have an opportunity to participate, it may indeed be virtual this year. That announcement hasn't been made, but there are ways to get you engaged in this process. And it's particularly important, next slide, because they're doing some work on some very pressing issues. One is voluntary guidelines are being drafted on food systems and nutrition. They are voluntary guidelines, but they are meant to go to all 194 countries or 193 countries in the UN system. And with that, under discussion are things that will matter to you, like what form of farming is good. Some people are trying to posit it as a particular approach. It might be a smallholder approach isn't innately good, or it might be the European approach is innately good, or it might be a pro-science approach is innately good. But for the most part, the conversation is quite complex and not necessarily highly respectful of the kinds of agricultural systems those of you in this alliance would be engaged in. And how food production should relate to the food environment. And then you're a group interested in the environment, but you're thinking about it in the scope of the planet. Here they're talking about food environments. If you're in an urban center, are you only exposed to quickie marts and processed foods? Can you get healthy foods? And fiscal measures to tax some foods, and they're discussing fiscal measures to incentivize some foods, and how they're thinking about rules about how foods are marketed, and also what is the definition of a healthy and sustainable diet. So lots of really meaty, significant topics. Next slide. And same when you think about agroecology and other innovations. And Ernie has been so active on this macro committee. It's just been a joy to have him involved. But agroecology was proposed as its own separate work stream, and the US mission was very involved in making sure innovations were also included. And innovations like climate smart agriculture. The fact is that there are lots of very different definitions of agroecology than the ones we grew up. I'm from a farm in Canada. I understood agroecology to be growing crops in the correct context. You don't grow wetland crops in dryland areas. You think about the macro environment and context in which you're growing to reflect the natural environment you're in. But when you get to the UN, it's laden with a lot of other things, sometimes very political things, very ideological things, like there shouldn't be trade of crops, or there shouldn't be production on farms beyond the scope of that immediate farm, or definitions about what kind of inputs, if you can even use external inputs. So it's a very different conversation than you might be used to. And what's under discussion? So what's the balance between innovation and agroecology in this document is very much under discussion. What systems of innovation should be cited? For instance, should climate smart agriculture be cited? We're very much in favor of that. Will digital agriculture be framed as positive or just a tool that needs to be regulated? And what is that framing for climate smart agriculture? And as Ambassador Tom said, next slide, all of this is even more important because we have the Food Systems Summit coming up next year. Next slide, please. So this goes right up to the top level. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, announced that this would be happening and has appointed this fabulous woman, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, from the African Green Revolution Alliance to facilitate a global discussion, which should culminate, I believe, in September, I think, but I see in the stream there are different dates being thrown out. But I think in theory, in September of 2021, heads of state level will be having a conversation. So that means the presidents, the prime ministers will all be talking about food and agriculture. And when's the last time we can think of that? So from now, right until that event, probably including a pre-summit event, possibly in Rome in around March or so, there's going to be a lot of activity, and there'll be 5 action tracks. We're waiting for the announcements of them, but one will probably be about climate and agriculture, one probably about biodiversity and agriculture, so things very relevant to you. So we're keen to have you more involved. We couldn't appreciate that more. And with that, last slide, I'll just say thank you so much, and to remind you that we are all involved in agriculture and providing ecosystem services, livelihoods, and food. So hearing our voices, these voices in these fora couldn't be more important, and I hope you'll be able to come and join us and to work with Ernie and team to be more effective in Rome and in the UN more generally. Thank you.
Robynne, thank you very much. That was a very informative, helpful presentation, and I know many of the NACSAA members have not had an opportunity to focus globally and have an appreciation for these multiple platforms, multiple issues, multiple players, and sometimes it makes your head spin. But nevertheless, if we're not there advocating for practical, pragmatic systems and practices that we know deliver these solutions to sustainable development goals, then we'll not have an opportunity to shape the outcome. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for including us. And as an example, we were on a call earlier today on the Food Systems Summit, the planning team that's working on it, trying to get our heads around how is it coming together, what are the most important issues, and how can we engage constructively. So fortunately, we are at the table now and we're participating. With that, I think we best pivot. We're running a little bit behind on time. And Robynne, thank you again. We now are going to turn our attention to what's happening here in the United States at the national level. And we're very fortunate to have with us Anna Cohen with the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis to talk with us about what's happening in the Congress these days on the climate front. Anna is a longstanding collaborator and friend of Solutions from the Land. She was an active early participant and colleague working to get the 25 by 25 renewable energy initiative up and running. And I've benefited greatly from her guidance and found her to be a very careful listener. So Anna, welcome, thank you, and look forward to an update on what's happening at the national level around agriculture and climate change.
Well, thank you, Ernie. Thanks for the invitation and all of your advice and guidance over the years I've known you. And then more recently, I've gotten to know Fred as he's been helping us at the Select Committee understand what's happening in agriculture right now, what are the opportunities that are out there, including coming to testify before the committee, which we really appreciate because we know that that is a burden for every witness who does that, or at least back then when you also had to travel to Washington, D.C. Congress is adapting a little bit, and so starting to do more virtual work in the future. So quickly about the Select Committee, we were established at the start of this Congress, and one of our main priorities was a big one, was to come up with recommendations for congressional action to help solve the climate crisis. And we were really given free rein to address that any way we saw fit. We've tried to be fairly comprehensive, so tackle both reducing carbon pollution, dealing with the impacts of climate change that are already here and we know are going to be with us for some time, as well as some of the complementary policies that we need for that economic development and that transformation to happen. And so our chair is Kathy Castor. She's a Democrat from Florida, from the Tampa Bay area. And then the Democratic side of the aisle has a range of folks from all over the country, including folks, especially our Western members, who have agriculture and a lot of forestry interests. And then on the Republican side, Garrett Graves from Louisiana, Congressman Graves, is our ranking member. And then we have a number of members from West Virginia, North Dakota, Georgia, Alabama. So a lot of folks with both agriculture and especially forestry interests. So it's been one area that has really enjoyed bipartisan interest and support. Right from the get-go. It was, one of our very first hearings. We had Matt Russell, who's a farmer from Iowa, vegetables, maybe tomatoes and cattle, if memory serves. But he really helped set our work off in a good way, and I think one that connects well with the North America Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, NACSAA. Is that what you all call yourself shorthand? Okay. And just really looking at the opportunities for agriculture and forestry. So, we know that farmers and ranchers and foresters are already doing things that are helping to store carbon, that are helping to make their operations more resilient to changing weather patterns and some of the other challenges that folks who work in nature especially feel. And so we've really looked at ways that we can enhance that ongoing great work, help give you the tools, the connectivity that would be needed to do more there, as well as continue the programs that have helped bring more renewables, more energy efficiency, and those type of additional benefits to the farming community. So you all have contributed your ideas. I was reviewing the kind of the 10 priority policies and program recommendations that you sent into the select committee in early March. And I'm happy to say, looking at these, I think when the report comes out, you're going to see a lot that you like in it and that matches up well with your priorities. And this reminds me that I think I need to mention that all of this hard work has really been driven by one of our councils, Kenzie Landa, who's put a lot of effort into understanding what's going on in ag and helping bring those together for our report. And so we were scheduled to try and roll out our recommendations at the end of March. And then obviously, as the country was dealing with the health crisis of COVID, and then the economic challenges that came with the response, we just put ourselves on hold. And now we're standing back up. It's very likely that we'll be putting our report out here within the month. It may be kind of right at the end of June or early July. Obviously, there's a lot going on in 2020, so we'll see if we have any more things that come our way. But we're working right now based on that time frame. And so I'll, definitely want to be following up with Ernie ahead of that time to make sure you all know what's coming in our report. as we put it out, because like I said, I think we've tried to cover the areas that you all have made recommendations in, and so hopefully what we've put in there you all will see as a positive way forward. And I think that's, maybe I'll pause there so I can field a question or two, if that makes sense, Ernie.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much. Appreciate your update. I'm happy to hear that there's a lot of the NACSAA recommendations that will be embedded in the House Select Committee report. That report is put together by a cross-section of NACSAA members, chaired by Ray Gasser, who's on the call today. So Ray, I'm sure you're smiling right now. So we'll look forward to that. Anna, I don't see a question, but if you could stay on, that would be great, because I want to segue to our final presenter today, and that's Fred Yoder. And we are running a few minutes behind, but I have sent a note around indicating that we're going to extend this webinar for 15 minutes. So hopefully you all will be able to stay on, because we are actually building to what we think is the most critical part of these conversations, and that's farmer, leader, real world experience, helping to shape the discussions and the outcomes. So with that, we're going to turn the floor over to Fred Yoder, who is a lifelong farmer. He is co-chair of Solutions on the Land. He's taken on the additional assignment of chairing NACSAA. Prior to that, he's been active in many farm organizations. He's the past president of the National Corn Growers Association, which is a NACSAA member today, and just a tremendously dedicated, hardworking volunteer. So Fred, we'll turn it over to you to bring us up to date on where are we with this Cornivia joint work on agriculture.
Well, thanks, Ernie. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Ernie?
We can. Fred, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. One of the things that some of us have been involved with all along has been going to the COP meetings. I think we've been to the last 7 or so. And up until last year, we've been having to operate in side meetings and things like that. But as we went through this, the UN finally came up with a place where agriculture could actually participate and understand for the world what agriculture can do to help in the climate issues. And so they formed this Cornivia joint work on agriculture. That's what that KWA stands for. And that's the UNFCCC's first ever agriculture program for work. And that stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so now agriculture's got a seat at the table to find out ways that we can contribute to the problems of climate change. How have we participated? Well, we have done a lot. We've already created a set of guiding principles and 5 sets of recommendations. We participated in the last 3 COPs with the intercessionals as the Cornivia work group has worked. And we are representing the North American farmer leaders, both US, Canada, and Mexico. Next slide. These are the 5 past submissions that we've submitted already. Modalities for implementation, which is the rules of the road, how we all going to operate, because we need to all be on the same page as far as how we operate and how we conclude things. We submitted methods and approaches for assessing adaptation and resilience, improve soil carbon, health, fertility, and integrated systems, for improved nutrient use, manure management, improved livestock management systems, and social, economic, and food security dimensions of climate change. And I just got to thank Lynn Bull, which is on today, and he headed up our livestock white paper, and it really is some really good stuff in there. Because one of the things that people don't realize is as you integrate livestock production with row crop production, the two there's so many synergies that we can work together, and we can also have a very efficient way to produce food, and as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So we were supposed to have a meeting in April, and it got postponed because of the COVID-19. It's been postponed to October. I believe it's going to be in Bonn. We still don't know whether we'll be meeting in person or whether it's going to be virtually, but we're going to be working on improved livestock management systems some more, and the social, economic, and food security dimensions of climate smart agriculture. One of the things that we've sure learned in this pandemic is there's some things we need to look at. You know, productivity is not all there is to it. I mean, we have to also look at ways that the infrastructure can be improved, because we saw what happened with the livestock processing plants that shut down because of workers getting sick, and all of a sudden we had backed up live animals ready for market and no place to go with them. And that's unfortunate. A lot of people going hungry, but we still have to euthanize animals because there's no way to get them processed. So we got to figure this out. Productivity is something that the North American farmer is really good at. But one of the things that we have to understand is if farmers are going to find out or be part of the solutions, then they have to be at the table. And that's what NACSAA is really focusing on, is farmer-led. And one of the things that that farmers do in North America that maybe we don't, Ambassador Tom talked about the farmers in the thinking in the African countries, is we have access to science. We have access to technology and innovation. And to me, those are the tools in the toolbox that we need to make sure everyone has access to, because status quo is not going to get it. And even though we have all these tools in the toolbox in North America, not everyone's using them. So we got to figure out ways to make sure that farmers use those tools in the toolbox. One of the things that we don't have is a one-size-fits-all. Different tools for different places in the countryside. Next slide, please. So again, the one-size-fits-all solution is not there. So we got to figure out how to adopt a new business unusual, quote-unquote, strategy and innovation. One of the things that we need to really focus and highlight is ecosystem services. But one of the things that the North American producer does is, even if you take something that's a specialty crop and you get extra money for it, before long, it's not too long, and then it becomes a mainline commodity because everyone jumps on it. So we overproduce it. Just imagine what we could do if we had an innovation technology that could sequester extra carbon. I'll guarantee you farmers would jump on it like crazy, and we would be overproducing it, where we would, so to speak, overproduce and sequestering carbon. So that's why we have to separate the productivity, but also, you know, in the development of resilience. Resilience costs money. So, you know, there's new equipment that needs to be purchased and used, new thinking about that, and new ways to do things. But when you focus on economic gain for the farmer, it's going to be advantageous for them, and it's going to move things forward in a much quicker way. So it's really important to not look at the one-size-fits-all, but look at the strategies that might work in different parts of the country that maybe not, it might be in your neck of the woods. Again, the pandemic has spotlighted a lot of shortcomings in the food security system. We can produce it, but we have to get food to the people that need it. We need to focus on our synergies and the co-benefits that everyone can benefit from. COP26 will be held in November 2021. They decided to postpone it a year, and the Corn Every Work Group will have a much wider audience, so we got a lot of work to go before then. Next slide. I just want to thank you for the members of NACSAA and the way we're going to get through this thing, because, you know, as they all say, the people that run the world are the ones that show up, and that's one of the reasons that I'm adamant that farmers have to be at these meetings and present, because believe me, some of the Cornevia workshop comments that I've heard, especially from some of the African countries, are just simply not necessarily accurate, and sometimes we're looked on down and when we use innovation and technology. But I'm telling you, a good example is here in Ohio, where I'm still planting soybeans, because we've had extremely wet weather this spring, and if it wouldn't be for the technology and innovation that I have access, I wouldn't have half my crop planted. So again, it's important. All the tools in the toolbox, let's apply the tools that make sense. So I'm looking forward to many good things happening in the Corn Every Work Group sessions, and if you have any suggestions, we'd sure like to hear them. Thank you.
Okay, Fred, thank you very much. As you indicated, this work is not yet complete. It's actually culminating to the implementation stage of discussion, and we look forward to the additional submissions that we'll be making based on the input that comes from the NACSAA members. And Fred, you shouted out Len Bull, but we've had many other contributors as well. Laura Moody with the Fertilizer Institute has really helped us with our nutrient management recommendations. Lois Wright Morton has been a heavy contributor on our socioeconomic recommendations. And it's stone soup. Everybody is contributing. We're bringing it together, forging consensus, and then our farmer envoys like you and Ray and others, like our new farmer envoys, one of which is Matt Russell from Iowa, Trey Hill, Craig Yonker, who's on the phone, Don Bilwalk, and one of our longtime supporters. These are the faces of production agriculture that will be going to Rome, going to Bonn, going to wherever these future meetings are, and sharing the good news that agriculture has the capacity to deliver not just on a food security objective, but also on the need to address the climate challenge, the need to improve biodiversity, the need to improve public health. These are all co-joined issues, and we're looking forward to an expanded work program here in the coming couple of years where we really bring forward innovation and technology and all kinds of practices that we've been honing over decades to enable agriculture to be valued and celebrated for the solutions that we can provide, and not just demonized for problems that people point to. We're not perfect. We know we have systems that are inadequate, but we're about continuous improvement, and that's one of our primary messages that we deliver. So we have gone over by a couple of minutes, but I do know we have another question that's come up. Anna, if you're still with us, Reed Dutchin has asked how the work of the Select Committee fits in with the work of other committees like Energy and Commerce and similar efforts in the Senate. And is there collaboration taking place within the House and crossing over into the Senate? What can you share with us on that?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I was about to go to that, and then I looked at the time and I thought, oh, I better wrap up. So great that we have a little extra time for that. So we have one of the things that is, I would say, unique about this Congress is that Speaker Pelosi created the Select Committee, but then she also told all the other committees in the House to look at the issues that affect climate change in their jurisdiction. So there's actually been a lot of hearings and activities and pieces of legislation that have been introduced across all the committees. And so we've been trying to work closely with the committees, learn from their expertise. Obviously, there's been things that have happened either in recent Congresses or this year or this Congress that are helping to advance climate solutions. So we've tried to incorporate that even as we are setting out a kind of roadmap of additional action that Congress will have to take. So we're putting this out there. I think there is a lot of appetite both from other members and other committees to use our recommendations as they develop their next pieces of legislation or see what may be feasible in legislative packages that may still go this year. You know, I think one thing the report will demonstrate is just the wide range of actions that we need to take as a nation to address, you know, the very complex issues and challenges, and to embrace the opportunities that trying to solve the climate crisis brings. We've also, you know, touched base with especially Democrats in the Senate to let them know what we've been working on. And as you all know, it's challenging to legislate right now in Congress, but we hope our report will really be setting the stage for possibly some near-term action this year, but definitely in the Congress to come.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for introducing us and our work we had over on the Senate side.
Yeah, I'm glad you could connect.
We did, and we had a hour-long teleconference last Friday with the staff on the Senate side to begin a dialogue there.
Great.
So everyone, I think we're at the point of wrapping up. I want to thank our presenters, Ambassador Tom, Robynne Anderson, Anna, Cohen, Fred Yoder, for your contributions today. I want to thank all of you for participating. This is a journey. This is a ongoing conversation, and we're successful when we're all in it together. And I think that line goes back to Ray Gasser, who uses it and reminds us all the time that when we all work together, we come out at a better place. So thank you for your engagement, your support, and we will be back in touch with a wrap-up of this webinar and look forward to our next conversation. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.